Guten Abend. Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Good evening, everyone, fellows, partners, friends, and followers of the Wissenschaftskolleg. Welcome to our public evening event, our lecture of our current fellow, Bin Hu, Professor of Sociology at Emory University, Atlanta. His work is situated at the intersection of cultural anthropology and political sociology. It revolves around the theme of collective memory and political culture, primarily in the People's Republic of China, but also beyond. Bin Hu is a wanderer between two worlds, so to speak. He was born in Hangzhou, in China, and earned his first university degree in Nanjing. And then he moved to the US and got his PhD at Northwestern University in 2011. Further stages of his career were Florida International University, then Yale, and finally Emory, Atlanta since 2016. So Bin is familiar with two very different political and academic cultures, which gives him, I think, a distance view of both sides. And I think this is what we call the ethnological gaze, which means it enables him to get aware of the blind spots of either culture. And I think this experience has sharpened his view and his awareness of the more subtle, the hidden, the unspoken features of political culture in China and in the so-called West. The crucial question he poses, I think, in most of his works is how do societies deal with collective hardships, natural disasters, political hardships, and as both natural and political hardships. How do we interpret them? How do we give meaning to them? How do we commemorate them, both individually and collectively? But also, how do we suppress these memories? And how does the culture of commemoration shape collective identity? If I had to bring Bin's work down to one point, I would say it is about fighting against oblivion. One of Bin's very first articles, a prize-winning article already, dealt with the Chinese Second World War victims' reparations movement as an exemplary case study of Chinese memory politics. And in his first book, The Politics of Compassion, which was published by Stanford University Press in 2017. He examined the surge of civic engagement in China following the severe earthquake of Sichuan in 2008, which some of you may remember. He highlights the unprecedented scope of this engagement as well as its political limitations and silences. The book was awarded a Best Book Prize of the American Sociological Association. And this success resulted in numerous invitations, not only to US universities, but also to Shanghai, Nanjing, and Hong Kong, among others. His second book, titled Chairman Mao's Children, published by Cambridge University Press, focuses on the generation of urban youth in China who were sent down, as they called it, by the state to work in villages and frontier areas during the 1950s and 1960s. And Bin describes that generation's struggle to come to terms with this extreme formative experience, but also with the state's strategy to transform these experiences into an official narrative of the China dream. In his latest book, The Culture of Democracy, a Sociological Approach to Civil Society, 22, Bin gives a wide-ranging survey of civic engagement worldwide, and I would say so provides us with a glimmer of hope that we desperately need right now. Here in the Wissenschaftskolleg, Bin pursues a new project dealing with another hardship that polarized the public, as you all know, the COVID pandemic and the masses of deaths it caused all around the world. A highly charged, highly controversial topic, as we all know, and a topic that has raised heated debates about political and ethical responsibility, a topic that many would prefer to forget. In this project, Bin collects material from various countries in order to explore how people established what he calls decentralized memorialization. Tonight, however, he will be talking about yet another topic, namely remembering and forgetting the Tiananmen incident, the brutal crackdown of the Chinese mass protests in 1989, named, almost ironically, after the Square of Heavenly Peace. In China, this incident has been gradually forgotten, or so it seems, and this is exactly what Bin calls into question. He challenges the assumption that silence is forgetting, or the assumption that silence must be interpreted as a lack of compassion or even as a kind of tacit complicity with the perpetrators. Rather, the absence of public commemoration is a highly ambivalent phenomenon, is widely open to interpretation. It may be interpreted as we don't remember, or we don't know, or we don't want to know, even we don't care, or rather we don't talk about, or we don't dare to talk about. So the question is, how can we uncover what is beneath the surface of public silence? And this is what Bin tries to explore. So he demands that we listen to the thunder in silence, quoting a line from a poem by Lu Xun, one of the greatest writers in modern Chinese literature. So we are very much looking forward, Bin, to your talk on memory and the forgetting of Tiananmen.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Barbara, for a generous introduction, and thank everyone for coming to my talk, particularly in this weather, which is hot by German standard. So I want to start with something also German, very close to us. In the German Historical Museum here in Berlin, right? There's an exhibit called Roads Not Taken, or Things Could Have Turned Out Differently, which shows the historical past that Germany could have taken but did not take at some historical junctures. One such juncture was the year of 1989, when the GDR and European communism were beginning to fall apart. This juncture was often represented in this iconic image of people sitting and standing on the Berlin Wall in front of Brandenburg Gate. I believe that many of you know this. But there was something that is special in the exhibit. So let me just show a very, very short video clip. If you walk into the museum, you see that the Berlin Wall image was printed on the surface that consisted of many double-sided paper columns. So if you walk from right to left, you see another side of this image actually emerges. That is one man actually standing in front of an array of tanks. Some of you probably immediately recognize this is the famous tank man image, right? Which represented the Chinese student protest movement that happened from April to June 1989, as known as the Tiananmen protest, because of the central location was in Tiananmen Square in Beijing, or sometimes the movement is called the June 4th movement, because the final brutal repression and killing happened on June 4th, 1989. For the former GDR, the Tiananmen protest served as the so-called Chinese solution, an option on the table, but eventually did not happen. Tiananmen undoubtedly functioned as a cautionary tale, a worst-case scenario, which both the GDR regime and also protesters eventually avoided. Consequently, Tiananmen was a road not taken. And Leipzig did not become Beijing, and October did not go down in history, October 9th actually, it did not go down in history as another June 4th. The GDR protesters dodged the bullet in both literal and figurative senses. On the other hand, as you can see on the pictures, Tiananmen was also a source of inspiration. These two pictures from the exhibit also show this in this exhibit. I encourage everyone to go to that exhibit if you haven't. So the Chinese words 民主, which actually means democracy, appeared in the demonstration in Leipzig. And this was one of the most successful Chinese language lessons in history. And the lesson certainly comes with a very hefty price. That is, an unknown number of people were killed during the crackdown, and many fled China, and many people's lives were permanently changed by this incident. The identity of the tank man remains unknown, but the picture has become one of the most iconic images of the 20th century. It was iconic for good reasons. The image reduced all the complexities of the movement into a simple confrontation between one man and also a gigantic state, which was represented by the tanks, the monstrous killing machines. And this is a typical David versus Goliath image, which fit well with the public expectation of the courageous individuals standing up to a repressive regime. Therefore, the image inspired and encouraged people in other countries, such as the GDR, and had a life much longer than the failed movement. So even Lego, your children's favorite company, try very hard to be serious about history and memory. So in addition to their overpriced Star Wars fighter jets and Death Stars and dinosaurs and so on, they also made a series called 50 Years of Making History, including this tank man image, and not surprisingly, that is the Fall of Berlin Wall image. The Berlin exhibit and the tank man image are just two examples of the memory boom of the Tiananmen in the past 35 years. Such memory boom took many other forms, including memoirs, documentaries, nonfiction books, drama movies, scholarly works, and so on. Here on the slide, I only list some of them. If you're interested, you can take a picture of the slide and look them up online. There are certainly a lot more. Another very important commemoration of Tiananmen is the anniversary vigils in Hong Kong. For 30 years, from 1990 to 2019, the central location was Victoria Park. If you've been to Hong Kong, you know where it is. But also related activities in other places in Hong Kong as well. All these forms of memories, however, are outside of China. When it comes to the memories of Tiananmen in China, the prevalent statement in the popular and academic discourses is that China has forgotten this event, or in similar words, amnesia or oblivion. For example, Yan Liangke, an outspoken writer, wrote about the state-sponsored amnesia in China, and he said that, quote, "In today's China, amnesia trumps memory. Lies are surpassing the truth. Fabrications have become the logical link to fill historical gaps," end quote. Louisa Lim's book, which is on the slide, The People's Republic of Amnesia, Tiananmen Revisited, provides a powerful narrative about how some Chinese remember the event, but ironically puts amnesia in the title. Some foreign journalists also interview young people, show them the tank man image, and most students certainly do not know what the person is. A few seem to know but refuse to answer the question. And then the journalists draw a conclusion that, oh, the young people in China have already forgotten Tiananmen, or China has forgotten Tiananmen. Some even accuse the Chinese of being complicit in memory suppression, as they claim forgetting allows the government to erase an unsavory history and the Chinese people to evade their own moral responsibility for their actions and acquiescence. In this type of discourse, forgetting is not only a political tactic by the state, but also a moral failure of ordinary people. Many of the uses of forgetting actually echo Milan Kundera's motto, the struggle of man against the power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Nevertheless, the popular uses of forgetting in Tiananmen memory have some issues. Consequently, forgetting in this case is a metaphor. It analogizes social and cultural phenomena to individual psychology. But a nation or an organization or a group is not an individual. It does not have a brain. It does not remember or forget. Rather, when people use forgetting at the levels above individuals, they actually talk about silence. In other words, the absence of certain discourses about a certain past. Moreover, ironically, almost all authors I mentioned earlier who use forgetting do not believe that the event is forgotten by individuals involved in the movement. Rather, none of the characteristics in this book, Louisa Lim's book, characters in this book has forgotten the incident, but still the title actually contains the amnesia in the word. Their terminology, however, creates an impression to people, particularly for cursory readers who only skim headlines or titles that the event is actually forgotten in its psychological sense by the whole society as a result of state's repression. This conceptual confusion causes some empirical issues. The term forgetting lumps together different cultural and social phenomena. Many users of forgetting refer to so-called forced forgetting, which means that some people who are eager to talk about the event but not allowed to talk about the event, such as the Tiananmen mothers, a group of bereaved family members whose children died in the event. They obviously have not forgotten the event. The state does not expect they will, rather the state wants them to be silent. Forced forgetting in this sense is not forgetting, but an absence of public discourses, that is silence, imposed by the state on the people. Forgetting has also been used to suggest that people experience or witness the event do not want to talk about it for various reasons, including fear of political persecution. In Lim's book, and she asked a woman about Tiananmen movement, but the woman immediately said that, quote, this problem is quite sensitive. Let's not talk about it now. Let's live in today's world and not dwell on the past, end quote. Obviously, this woman knows what Lim is asking about and has not forgotten the event. Forgetting has been used to suggest that younger generations do not know the event or why a man standing in front of tanks. This is not forgetting. Forgetting actually means that one knows something but is unable to recall it later, right? But the younger people do not know the event, so it is meaningless to say they have forgotten it. It is a scenario of a lack of knowledge about this event. In some cases, people know about the incident but do not talk about the event because they simply don't care. In those cases, they have not forgotten the event but just apathetic or indifferent. They don't care for different reasons. For example, at the micro level, they believe the incident is irrelevant to their personal life. At the macro level, the incident was regarded as irrelevant to Chinese society in a 20-year period after Tiananmen, from early 1990s to early 2010s. In this period, the Chinese state appeared more flexible, pragmatic, while the Chinese society was relatively more open, more audacious. People are encouraged to pursue personal pleasure and also material wealth. Meanwhile, a cultural boom occurred. Some cultural products produced in that period, for example, Farewell My Concubine, which is a great movie produced in 1993, and then To Live, another movie in 1994, etc., are not even imaginable in today's China. In other words, making Tiananmen a taboo did not make China a dystopia in that historical period. This relatively open atmosphere and China's economic boom somehow diluted the magnitude and intensity of grievances and weakened the need of a traumatic event to mobilize social activism. Gradually, the need and the willingness to talk about Tiananmen faded. In all these scenarios which are listed here, when forgetting is used, it actually means silence. But what exactly is silence? Why is silence better than forgetting for us to understand the memory of Tiananmen? I define silence as the absence of discourses in a certain field or level of a society about a historical event. In this sense, silence is not absence of any discourses or any voices, but certain discourses. The absence of discourses in one social field or one social level does not mean silence in others. For example, for 30 years, the anniversary commemorations of Tiananmen in Hong Kong made headlines outside of China, but have not been reported or publicly discussed in China. This is a disconnection between the two fields, inside China and outside China. Similarly, the absence of discourses at one social level does not mean silence at other level. Here I divide society roughly into 3 levels. One is individual level, and the second is group community level, including various small to medium-sized social units, such as families, organizations, and groups, and local communities, and so forth, which actually based on the face-to-face interactions among the people. And third is the so-called public, which refers to social or mediated spaces accessible for strangers, for example, the public sphere based on the media. And silence comes from disconnections among these levels. For example, former protesters certainly have not forgotten the event, thus their memory of the event stays in their minds. This is an individual level memory. But they do not talk to others about their experience for various reasons, which I listed. And there is an interpersonal silence, in other words, at the group and the community level. But if they do talk about the event to others, and then the memory goes beyond the individual level to the group and the community level. For example, a parent may randomly mention the event over dinner table to a curious teenager, or bereaved families form groups like the Tiananmen mothers. Nevertheless, if such memories go up to the public level, and in this case, for example, the victim set up an online group, received media interviews, try to post their statement online and take other actions, they will face the state's repression. As a result, there is a public silence. So most cases of so-called forgetting Tiananmen are actually cases of public silence caused by the disconnections between personal memory, group, community memory, and public memory. The public memory is actively and laboriously created and maintained by institutions, organizations, and people, in this case, mostly the Chinese state. So this well-maintained public silence about Tiananmen is similar to the elephant in the room situation, in which a gigantic snorting elephant is too big to ignore in the room, but people in the room pretend there's nothing and do not talk about it at all, but carefully try not to bump into it or step on its nose. But how do we study silence? It may sound ironic to study something absent. It is difficult for sure, but we do have some methods, which I describe as listening to thunder in silence. This sentence actually comes from, as Barbara mentions, one of the greatest Chinese writers, Lu Xun. In a poem he wrote in 1934, when he was angry about the Nationalist Party government's political repressions and the censorship, which is quite relevant to what we are talking about here, although in a very different historical context. Here I suggest several ways to listen to thunder in silence. Method number 1, shooting the elephant. If the public silence of Tiananmen resembles the elephant in the room situation, then you have an American solution. You pull out a gun and to shoot the elephant. That is, when the elephant is shot, experiencing pains, moaning, and screaming, it cannot be hidden anymore. It then needs the state's extra effort to put up a facade of nothing to see here. And the state's extra effort to maintain the silence makes the silencing in action more visible. I borrowed this phrase, shooting the elephant, from George Orwell's classic essay that is called Shooting an Elephant, in which the narrator, possibly Orwell himself, a British police officer in Burma, was pushed by the locals' expectations to shoot an alleged violent elephant, even though he did not see any sign of violence. Even he didn't really want to shoot the elephant, but he did it anyway. So the moral of the essay is about the paradox of imperialism and the paradox of colonialism, or power in general. So he says in the essay, quote, "When the white man turns tyrant, it is his own freedom that he destroys," end quote. So if the white man in this sentence is replaced by the Chinese government, and then the sentence makes much sense. When the Chinese state coerces people into silence on Tiananmen, it destroys its own freedom. It has to do the silencing work with the regular and increasingly stronger effort, but the stronger effort itself makes the silencing more conspicuous. In other words, shooting the elephant means paying much attention to the moments when the state makes extra effort to maintain the silence, but the effort itself makes the taboo more visible. A typical such moment is, around June 4th every year for 35 years around the country, and there has been heavy police presence on university campuses in China. And news media are ordered not to make any mistakes on that day or around that day, not to publish any politically sensitive things, and dissidents and activists are closely monitored or under house arrest. Even the place, Tiananmen Square, is often cordoned off. On a normal day, you can actually book a ticket online to go up the Tiananmen Gate. So Tiananmen in Chinese means the gate of heaven and peace. It's actually a gate instead of just a name for a square. So you can book a ticket online, which is actually one of the tourist attractions in Beijing. But that's not possible on June 4th. If you book a ticket online, you get a message, sorry, Tiananmen is not open to public on June 4th without any explanations. I can verify this because this is a screenshot I got online this year earlier on June 4th. At other moments, shooting the elephant is accidental and unplanned. So in this picture, you see a young man who is one of the richest and most prominent, influencers in China. His name is Li Jiaqi. So he sells various products online through live streaming sessions. 2 years ago, when he was doing a live streaming sessions, and he was trying to sell two things, ice cream cake, Oreo, and put them together into a shape of tank. And then saying, well, how cute this tank is. Unfortunately, that day was June 4th. June 4th and the tank put together. So almost immediately after this live streaming session, his social media accounts got suspended. If my social media account got suspended, it's not a big deal. For him, that's a lot of money. So this is what people call the Li Jiaqi paradox, or the paradox of the taboo. So we can state this paradox as the following. One, people do not know the taboo until they accidentally violate the prohibition and get punished. And the second, but the punish makes you know the taboo, and the taboo is not a taboo to you anymore. And then third, the more Li Jiaqi incidents, the more people would know about the event, although their knowledge of the event remains fragmented. So after his social media accounts got suspended, millions of fans were asking around, what actually happened? Who knows the reason for the suspension? And nobody answered the question, because if you answer the question in an honest way, and then your social media account would have got suspended as well. And then people say, like, ask your mom and dad. And then certainly through private conversations, many people actually know what happened. Method number 2, digging documents. Contrary to the conventional wisdom, many textual materials about Tiananmen are available in some places, although not all of them are accessible. Also, contrary to conventional wisdom, the state published a lot of books on the Tiananmen incident in the first 2 years after the incident as a way to educate the people with the correct collective memory, so-called. Believe it or not, some of the books and the materials are still available in public libraries and university libraries as well. For example, I did a small-scale study a couple of years ago about Tiananmen memory in one of the least likely venues, the People's Daily, 人民日报. So normally, if you want to tell people that you knew very little about China, you can just say, oh, I studied China through reading the People's Daily. And people will be laughing at you because they believe that the newspaper is just a propaganda, which is actually true. It is a propaganda. But if your purpose is to study propaganda, and in this case, to know the official narrative about the Tiananmen incident, then the People's Daily 人民日报 is the right source of data. And the newspaper is in digital and paper forms, widely available in many university libraries and also public universities like Shanghai libraries in China. So what I did in this study was to search several keywords, which were the official terms to describe the incident. The first one is 暴乱 in Chinese, which means riot. And the second one is 动乱, turmoil. And the third one is 风波, disturbance. In both full text and the titles from June 4th, 1989 to December 31st, 2018. A result of this search is summarized in this table. Probably you can see that, which might be surprising to you. In the first 2 years, quite a lot of articles actually talk about this event. So there's a clear trajectory of official narratives. In the wake of the incident, there were many, many official discourses about the incident. It was what Vinitsky Sarosi, who is an anthropologist working on memory as well, she actually termed cacophonous silence, which means using a lot of sounds and voices to cover some voices. And in this case, using very loud official narratives to cover the unofficial narratives, for example, from the victims or from the bystanders, witnesses. So there was a silence underneath the hundreds of reports in the People's Daily in the first 2 years. The turning point, as you can see here, is actually 1992 to 1993, when the state probably realized that loud official narratives still made people talk about the event. And the talking itself is politically dangerous, so they decided to shut down. And the whole topic gradually became a complete taboo. There were certainly some nuances. For example, if you look at the table, there are a few disturbances that appear even in 2000s, right? But if you read these texts closely, you'll find the use of the terms are rather cursory and vague, without many details, often in the phrase that is called the disturbance when spring turned into summer in 1989, 春夏之交的风波. Such uses are not in the headlines at all. If you don't have any background knowledge, what happened, when the spring turned, summer in 1989? You don't know anything. So, and also very few people would read the People's Daily, at least not as carefully as I do. So the few appearances of the word disturbance did not change the overall silence. Method number 3, deciphering the hidden transcripts. According to James Scott, hidden transcripts are discourses that take place off stage and beyond the direct observation by power holders. In this case, hidden transcripts are various offstage ways in which memories of Tiananmen sneak into the public sphere without directly challenging the state's imposed silence. There are several types of hidden transcripts. The first one is what I call camouflage the resistance, which means that changing and recoding some widely known and banned symbols or dates or words and turning them into messages of resistance. So these messages are pretty clear. That is basically just recoding the Tiananmen image. I don't know why the yellow ducks are so popular at the time. It was like 10 years ago in Hong Kong and in mainland as well. The other one, the Chinese reads that in that year I cannot stop you, but now you don't want to stop me. Which probably you can figure out is really against the Chinese state's internet surveillance, right? So you have a bunch of mice in front of a sort of a forbidden symbol. Another one is what is quite popular in recent years. So let me play the video a little bit.
Going too much. Tiananmen Square. Why? Why? I think this is my duty.
So what is impressive in this very short video is the exuberance and confidence in this young man's face. And then people made this video into lots of memes. So this one is one of them, actually my favorite one. So if you do not have any historical knowledge about the event, you probably think, oh, this one man with the red headband and a bunch of doves, and then that's it. But this is also a way of resistance. And another way, another hidden transcript is called foreign parallels, which draws parallels between cases in other countries and Tiananmen. A typical example is this Korean movie that is called A Taxi Driver, which was directed, I believe, by Jang Hoon, but starring Song Kang-ho. Some of you probably know that's the Parasite main actor. So this movie was widely cited and discussed in China, alluding to Tiananmen incident, because the movie is about Gwangju incident in 1980, and there's a student and also citizens uprising in a city called Gwangju in South Korea. Another hidden transcript is called marginal allusions. So marginal allusions use image completely irrelevant to the Tiananmen incident, but highlight and modify some symbols, words, and the numbers allude to the event. They're also so common that the state simply cannot ban them. For example, this picture, some of you probably already figured out, what is that? It's the number, right? It's the 6-4, which means June 4th, right? This one is a test of your age. If you're above 50, I don't expect you to know what this person is. But if you're younger than 50, you probably know this is Taylor Swift, right? So this is a Taylor Swift album that is called 1989. Why 1989? Anyone knows? She was born in 1989. And TS stands for Taylor Swift. Could also stand for Tiananmen Square. That's right. So when the album was released, and she gave a concert in Shanghai. So quite a lot of people are selling T-shirts online in Taobao, China's equivalent to eBay. And so you see two groups of people on the streets of Shanghai. One is a group that you would expect, young people with a T-shirt with excitement. The other group of people look very suspicious. They're middle-aged people like me, wearing T-shirt with a Taylor Swift and a TS 1989, walking on the streets of Shanghai. So that was a kind of an interesting moment. But it didn't get banned. And then, state still allows a concert, and the state kept quiet on this. Because if you ban this, that would be a huge international news. So most of these hidden transcripts are eventually suppressed and may not lead to significant social impacts. But they quietly and persistently keep the memory of Tiananmen alive underneath the deafening silence. Method number 4, entering the counterpublics. Because silence comes from disconnections between fields and the levels, and you need to go beyond the current level or field to enter other fields and level to find the discourses. For example, you go down to the small public level to enter the group and the communities where people are talking about Tiananmen, for example, the former protesters and the mothers and the bereaved families. Method number 5, uncovering personal views. And this method goes down one more level to talk to individuals. And this method is most effective in exploring why individuals remain silent. Of course, both entering counterpublics and uncovering personal view are politically risky, but they're not entirely impossible. One way to get around this sort of a barrier is to interview those who are originally from China but now residing in other countries. So this situation is similar to what China scholars did before 1980s when the China's door was closed, and so they interviewed those immigrants from mainland China to Hong Kong. Finally, I want to talk about the ethics of silence. The ethics of silence boils down to what to do and what to say under a repressive regime, and whether one's choice of action is morally justifiable. The term forgetting, I argue, carries too much of a moral burden. Even in everyday interactions, forgetting implies a slight accusation, a minor remorse. The person forgetting something has to apologize. For example, sorry, I forgot to buy milk on my way home. In public discourses, remembering atrocities is regarded as a moral duty, while forgetting is a moral failure, sometimes equated with killing victims twice over. One's failure to remember an atrocity would be criticized as an evasion of one's moral responsibility. Therefore, some argue that remembering is the key to repentance and forgiveness, while oblivion is complicity in crimes. But this broad moral accusation often misses the target and cannot hold in most empirical cases I just mentioned. First, as I've been arguing, forgetting is conceptually problematic. In all the cases, the actually right term is silence. And the second, if we revisit the cases of silence, and then the moral accusation becomes really problematic. For example, in the case of those who want to talk but not allowed to talk, such a moral accusation is certainly wrong. You don't expect victims to risk their lives, right? So the blame should be on the state. The case of those who do not want to talk, their inability to speak out is a result of state's systematic repression and blocking of information. Again, the blame should be on the state. As for those who do not talk due to their lack of knowledge, the third case, the accusation does not make any sense. Well, how could you expect someone who is not aware of something to talk about this thing? The blame, again, should be on the state about the school education, about discourses, and so on and so forth. And the don't care cases, the last one I listed here, might be the only scenario in which this moral accusation could be applicable because, in general, indifference to an atrocity is morally dubious and also could be seen as an evasion of a responsibility or a type of complicity. Nevertheless, even this scenario is more complicated than many assume. So let's take a close look at it. I would argue that whether indifference is a morally questionable type of complicity depends on the role people play in the movement, victim or perpetrator or participant or bystander. If the person is a victim, indifference is an unlikely scenario, but even this scenario exists, it's the victim's right to be indifferent. If the person is the perpetrator of atrocity, then the indifference is a clear case of evasion of moral responsibility, is morally indefensible. For example, the main perpetrators, those people who decided on the killing, and the commanders, and so on and so forth. And also the small perpetrators, the rank and file in the army, the soldiers, and the low-ranked officers. They may defend their indifference by saying that they just follow the order from the superiors, and even in that case, and they probably get legally exonerated, but their argument is morally dubious. This is why so many people actually keep quiet after the incident. If the person is an average participant in the movement or a bystander in the last two cases, which I listed here, then is this person morally implicit? And these scenarios has considerable moral ambiguities. I can see reasons for different choices of action. On the one hand, they do have the moral responsibility to serve as witnesses of atrocities. Their indifference is moral complicity. On the other hand, it is fair to claim that their indifference and apathy are a result of long-term severe censorship on the topic. The longer you live in such censorship, the less likely you talk about it. The less you talk about it, the less likely you care about atrocity. This is what is usually called the spiral of silence. And therefore, the blame should also be on the state. Nevertheless, I want to stress a few points I listed here. One is that the identities I listed here are fluid and ambiguous. A small perpetrator, for example, could become a victim. A soldier who knew nothing, a country boy mobilized to go to Beijing, was told that there are hooligans on the streets and we need to kill them all. And he did. And later, he knew that what actually happened is not really a riot and these people are just Beijing residents. And he suffered from PTSD and he becomes both a perpetrator and a victim. Also, I want to emphasize, people can change. Much indifference could be the result of a lack of enough information about the massacre. There is a possibility that when they acquire enough information about atrocities, they may turn themselves into a person who actively reflects on the past and their own ethical responsibilities. And the essential fact is that regardless of their reasons and their desires, people simply cannot openly break the public silence on the Tiananmen incident in China. For these empirical reasons, I advocate for ethical neutrality, which means a temporary suspension of moral judgment in situations with multivocal silence under a repressive regime. We are not entirely sure why people remain silent, but we can understand some reasons are legitimate and justified. We are also empathetic with their moral political dilemmas in an authoritarian context. So in practice, ethical neutrality means a few don'ts and do's are listed here. Don'ts: do not rush to the conclusion that people have forgotten Tiananmen. Do not make cursory moral accusations about complicity or guilt. And do's: respect people's silence. Be patient when you hear nothing in silence. Understand their dilemmas and trust that many who are silenced who have not forgotten Tiananmen. And if the situation changes, they may break the silence. The ethical neutrality anticipates the possibility of a resistance. In some situations, silence is also a form of resistance. So this is a picture of a young college student standing with a blank paper in her hands. The time was 2022. The place was Nanjing, one of the Nanjing colleges. Did she say anything? No. Any words on her white paper? No. She was completely silent, even with a mask on her face. Yet, this small gesture was the beginning of a series of protests, which later were dubbed the White Paper Revolution against the draconian lockdown policy and the Xi Jinping administration in general. Similar white paper protests took place inside and outside China, including here in Berlin. So if you compare the two images, from the Tiananmen tank men to the white paper protesters, 30 years apart, two generations of Chinese young people stand up to the authoritarian regime. And this is a collage of pictures people just put together online who wore masks with words, no, I can't, 不能, and no, I don't understand, 不明白 in Chinese. So the words originally came from Dr. Li Wenliang, the whistleblower of China's COVID pandemic, and who was later detained by the police and interrogated and forced to sign a confession document in which he was required to write down, yes, I can, 能, meaning that can obey the law and not to spread the so-called rumor, which is the information about the virus. And also, yes, I understand. So it's the 明白, which means that I understand what I did was unlawful, was illegal. And certainly Dr. Li Wenliang died and he was infected by the virus. And later, many Chinese turned the expression upside down to no, I can't, no, I don't understand, 不能, 不明白, to demonstrate their defiance. So I want to call your attention to their silence. They remain silent behind their masks, which functioned as a defensive mechanism to hide their identities. But the silence is not complicity, is not a cowardice, but a form of a resistance. With these new cases of a silent resistance, I want to emphasize the people who are silent today could become forces of change tomorrow. I have enough reason to believe that one day when the time is ripe, these young people will take off their masks. And like the confident and exuberant young man riding a bike to Tiananmen Square 35 years ago, right? And will say in a loud voice in both English and Chinese to the world, we're going to march. Where? Tiananmen Square. Why? I think it is my duty. Thank you very much.